I go to the US quite a lot, as many of you know. And the beginning of this year, I went over at Easter time. And it's one of the few times I've actually had a decent rant on Facebook, that beautiful social medium that we all love to get on and stalk people with. I'm sitting there in the US. It was late one evening, and I was at a cafe, Johnny Rockets, over there, and really the only reason I go there is for the caramel milkshakes, which are just enormous, and they just keep giving you free refills, which I love. And it's Easter time, and there is in front of me two very different families. In front of me directly are two. In my Facebook rant, I may have gone a little far. I believe I called them redneck Americans, and I apologize on Facebook for that. But they were standing there, and they were as ochre as what some of our Aussies are. And just in front of them was a Muslim family. And this Muslim father, and I did actually know they were Muslim. We ended up having a chat later, so I'm not just making stereotypical assumptions by the way they looked, handed an Easter egg to his son. And the two Americans behind, which I could overhear, so what do they know about Easter? Jesus didn't die for them. I walked away and I actually got into the car and I actually wrote on Facebook in the car. I couldn't even wait to get back. I didn't know how to respond to it. I didn't know what was going on there. This clash of cultures, everything was just getting mucked up. But they truly believed that Jesus didn't die for these particular people in front of them. For those who are good friends, and you don't even have to be really good friends with me, you probably know that change and me don't go together too well. I don't like change. My wife even calls me Sheldon, from those who know The Big Bang Theory. That's what she calls me. At home, I have to sit in the same seat every time. It is my seat and everyone knows it. And be aware if you try and sit in it. I go to the same restaurants. If we go out, I can list you probably 4 restaurants that I actually go to here in Brisbane, and they're the only 4 I will go to, pretty much. We've got, obviously, the classic Punjabi Palace, which, when I go there, I order the exact same Indian curry every time without fail, the exact same naan every time without fail. We go on and I move across from Indian because I'm so broad in my food sort of palate. I then move across to Mexican and I'll go to Montezuma's, and that's where the actual name of my sermon, which was going to be slightly different, came about, the Vegetarian Enchilada. I used to go so much to Montezuma's with a bunch of people, Simon and Jason, Liz, Christy, a lot of people back then. We used to go so much, and I ordered the same thing. A vegetarian enchilada, double-sided rice, and a bowl of guacamole. That I never even had to order it. I would walk in and they would bring it to me. And I kid you not, that is the truth. Nicole, the owner, we ended up becoming a little bit friendly. She even supplied all of the dips for our engagement party because I was one of her best customers. It was good dip for those who were lucky enough to be invited to my engagement party. I eat the same foods at home. I go to the same places. I don't like new people. No offense. I just like being the same. I'm not sure if all of you are like that, but that's just me. When I travel to the US, for those who know me, there is one place I would travel to the US for, and it's a fast food place. I don't understand. Anyone know what that is? Taco Bell. Oh my word, from heaven itself. A 7-layer burrito minus lettuce and tomato, because I don't like them. So it's a 5-layer burrito and a cheese quesadilla. And I have that every time. And there are times in the US I will have that 4 times a day. Don't judge. I like the same things. And if I don't go to Taco Bell because my stomach just cannot have another Mexican meal, I go to the Cheesecake Factory. And the Cheesecake Factory, I don't actually go there for the cheesecake. That would be stupid. It's like going to the macaroni grill there and you can't actually order macaroni, just a side note. But go to the Cheesecake Factory and I get my arancini balls. And I get my cheese pasta. There's a common theme here. Cheese is fairly high up on my food chain out of interest. And that is what I do. My friends know it. My family knows it. It is who I am. And I started to think back as to why I have this urge to keep being the same and keep rejecting anything that is slightly different to what I am. And I come back to blaming my parents. That's what we all do. You can always throw it back at them somehow, especially my mother. So you get off today, Dad, just a little bit more, but growing up as a kid, I had the same doctor, family doctor, till I left home, Dr. Curry. We were on such good terms, we would go to his house for a consultation. We had the same hairdresser from the day I was pretty much born, Jo. If you, Lincoln, you remember her, Jo, we would actually travel down when she left her hair salon at Capella Bar because she wanted to quit hairdressing. We kept going to her at her own home. My mother wanted everything the same. I was looking through photos last night. We'll see if I've got them here. We'll get back to that. Actually, no, I'll say this now. This was just the verse I was going to base the sermon on. Romans 3:23. It's an extremely well-known verse, and we'll get back to that in a second. But I was looking through some photos last night. I don't know if you can see this. I want you to follow my hairstyle. Okay? This is important. Stay with it for just a little bit. This is not in complete chronological order, but me growing up over the first sort of 16, 17 years of my life. Now, Lincoln's as well, of course, but if you notice one thing, it really doesn't change. My mother had good control over that bowl haircut, and it wasn't until I got old enough I was allowed something that was controversial at home, a side part. I needed to change something up. I had pimples everywhere. I needed a distraction from my face, so a side part was it. And then, lo and behold, I finally went for a middle part because that was as much change as I could handle at the time. For my whole life was based around everything being the same. Half the time to my detriment. I can remember walking into a room once, and there was a guy, it was Andrew Robinson's house. I walked in there and I had a bunch of friends there, and sitting on that couch in the front row, watching some TV was a new guy. His name was Simon, who I get hacked off a lot by my friends and my brother especially. Simon was there. I didn't talk to him, and we discussed this since. I don't think I talked to him for I don't know how many weeks of meeting him there, but I had this very well preconceived idea that he was a computer nerd and I wasn't, and that I really didn't need any new people in my life, so I didn't. Over time, he grew to become my best friend and has been ever since. But the thought of not accepting something that was slightly different would have completely altered my life in that one case. Growing up as a kid, I can remember going to the same clothing store. Every time we had new clothes, down on the corner of Wynnum, we went to the same men's clothing store. My mother dressed me from the age of 4 through to 21 from that same store. We went to the same church. I went to Wynnum Church till I left home pretty much at age 21, 22. I've lived in 2 houses. I lived with my mum and dad, and then I moved out, got my house, and I've been there ever since. So if you get the general feeling, I don't like change. Marrying Emma was an experience, a great one, obviously. That goes without saying, hence why I didn't. But this has opened my eyes. She tries putting in weird food into my normal food. I love spinach pie. Now, this is something I never liked before I married her because it was spinach. But she puts a lot of cheese in there now, so I'm okay with it. But only just a few months ago, she started messing with it. She put kale in, not spinach. I tasted it, spat it back out, and went, what have you done? And she's like, I'm trying something new. I'm like, I don't do it. But she's opened my eyes to things like peach iced tea. Whoever knew there was such luscious liquid in this world? And other foods and places and where we go and what we do culturally have changed because of her. But I think if you asked her, she would say it's the biggest uphill battle she has in her life, making any small change in mine. And then we come across Jesus. Jesus comes into the Bible, and his main purpose, if you read about him through the Gospels, through the New Testament, what is the one thing he did the most? He changed things up. That's what he did. He came and he ruffled the feathers of the Pharisees and Sadducees. He threw out their Sabbath-keeping laws. You know, back in his time, they had a book on Sabbath keeping. 24 chapters. I've read them. 24 chapters on how to keep the Sabbath in a Jewish society at Jesus' time. They went to that book more than ever. They went there more than the Bible itself. And they had some pretty cool rules. And when I was reading it, some stuck in my head. Did you know that if you were a Jew, on the Sabbath day and your house was burning down, there were rules as to what you could save and what you could not save from your house? Now, for example, a lady was allowed to go into the house, put a dress on, and save that dress and come back out. Once that act had been done, she could then go in and get another dress and save that dress on the Sabbath. But you couldn't get multiples at one time. If a Gentile came, somebody not Jewish came along, you weren't allowed to ask them to put the fire out, but if they did so willingly, you were to accept their gracious gift and allow them to put your house fire out. There were so many little rules, and this is the context to where Jesus comes into. And he sits there and you look at all of the parables, the stories he tells, and it's all about change so that he can accept more people. He goes and heals people on the Sabbath, which was so wrong. He then comes back at them and says, what? You would go and save your own donkey, but you'll let this man sit here lame? He allowed his disciples to go and pick food through a field on a Sabbath day because he didn't want them to starve. He broke all these rules, all these little niggly standards that these people had put into their 24 chapters and said, you know what, I'm here to change things up. He brought along with him a tolerance and acceptance of people where they were at. You think about Jesus in this day and age, and by saying this I don't want to offend anyone, and obviously by saying that I'm going to offend somebody, otherwise I wouldn't have said it. But you think of Jesus in this day of age, if he was from Brisbane, what would he be like? What would we see in him walking into this church? And he would come from probably one of the lower socioeconomic areas. And in Brisbane, that is somewhere like Nala. And as I say, I apologise if you're from there. That's statistics. And he would come along and he would hang out down at his local pub. And he would sit there with some hookers. And he would talk to them. He would wander around the countryside, and the people who were going before him to tell everyone that he is the king of the world would be dressed in garbage bags, walking around eating insects, unkept, unshaven, wandering around the desert of Brisbane. And when he was born not into a hospital or anything. He was born in the back of a motor mechanic store with grease everywhere. And we as a church, me as a church member, guarantee would have looked at him and gone, not my king. It just doesn't fit. And he would have walked in here and perished the thought. He may have had tats down his arms or whatever it might have been. But he was different. He looked different. He spoke differently. And he went against every convention there was. But he had a reason for it all. His reason was he wanted change. He wanted people to be more tolerant, more accepting. That's the gift he brought down. There was a, let's see if I've got it here. John 4:9. This is the woman at the well. It's a well-known story, no pun intended. It's a story where this woman, Jesus is thirsty, he's been traveling, preaching to people, he goes into Samaria. He's standing there at the well and there's a woman there. And he asks her for a drink. As you can see from here, how is it that you, being Jewish, asks for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? The Jews don't come near us. The society in which Jesus lived at the time was so segregated. Not only did you have to be Jewish, but within the Jewish society you had to be one of the elite to know about the scriptures, to potentially be saved, to look and wait for the king. And this woman at the well is sitting there and she gets him a drink and is astounded. And he talks to her. And they discuss her marital life and how the fact that she wasn't married and Jesus just came out of that. She didn't tell him, he knew, and she goes, "You're a prophet." And he goes, "I know about your previous 5 husbands. And yet I still talk to you. I will give you water from a living well that you can't get anywhere else. You will be saved." She goes back so absolutely astounded by the acceptance of this Jewish prophet that she goes back to her whole city, brings them back, and he talks to them. And it wasn't just a feel-good story. It says in there that they hadn't really believed her when they came back and said that there was a Jewish man who was willing to talk to them and save them and preach them and prophesy to them. But they came back and they said, "We believe you now, woman of Samaria. We've seen it with our own eyes." I don't know, but for me, following a God who sits there at a pub most of the day, through the week, with prostitutes, the tax collectors, which at the time were the scammers of the world, seems really odd. We come here to church sometimes, and I know I come here to church, and you look around, and you can't help but judge. Somebody who's slightly different to you, dresses differently, goes to different places, does different things on Friday nights or Sabbaths than what you do, eats different food. Whether you're right or wrong about it is irrelevant. Whether or not you can accept that person as a child of God is the point. There are some huge issues facing the church at the moment. I've just picked a few, but these have been issues that have been going on with the church for ages. Some of them are newer, but we're seeing it. I'm fortunate or unfortunate enough to sit on the executive committee for our church here in Queensland. And it can sometimes be the most boring thing you can possibly do with your day, when all you're doing is sitting, looking at accounts and money and what's going on and where you're putting funds to and stuff. It can be a challenging day when you have to remove a pastor. There are some tough times and some good times, but I tell you what, the one thing you notice when you're sitting there are the things that are coming up on our church, maybe before we get to see them in here. There's been some oldies and goodies, worship styles. We here at Springwood were smart. We just said, well, we're going to have 2. Go whichever one you want. We have a worship style here which contains drama and movement to music as a really good way of saying dance. We have a drum kit up on stage. We barely used to have a piano. We have a very different style. And if you take that style in next door, half the people walk out. If you take their worship style into here, half the people walk out. That's just human nature. But it's coming. And there are times when we look up the front here and we see guys, especially the young guys, looking at you, Steele, sitting there all cool in your suit. And Mitch and these guys who get up the front, and I know there have been people who have walked in here before and gone, that is not right up in church. The tolerance and acceptance isn't there. And I look and say, how can you possibly look at somebody who is dedicating their time to God, to serving you, the people, and say that? And then we come across another it's a doozy one here in our Adventist church. Women ministers, women pastors. We have one here at Springwood, Cara, who's currently preaching the ARV today. But there were lots of churches who wouldn't even accept Cara as a pastor if we'd placed her there. And that's just a fact. People are at different stages in their lives, in their Christian spiritual journey. Do you know today, do we actually ordain women pastors? Does anyone know? Anyone know? Yes, no? No one's willing to put their hand up? No, we do not. They're looking at it at the moment. They've got a 100-person panel at the moment meeting to bring back a recommendation in 2014. But at the moment, some conferences and divisions have gone off and ordained women pastors. And it's causing a huge ruckus amongst the saints here, because most of our constitutions for our local churches say that we're allowed to make decisions as long as they are agreeable with the general conference policy. And they're not. And then we get to the topic that I had more people ask me to talk about, gay marriage. This is a topic that is going to be huge in our church soon. And if you don't think so, I personally believe you're wrong. This is a topic that is going to hit in so many different areas. It's a tough topic to talk about. Because if you talk about it and you say, I'm against gay marriage, then a lot of people will call you a homophobe. Say that you now hate different people and there's hatred within you. If you agree with it, other people go, well, hang on, that's not biblical, is it? And wipe you out from church. But these issues here, just those three that I've picked up on, are issues about acceptance. What you believe God actually wants from your church is a completely different thing. Accepting that person as being loved by God regardless is the question. I have personal views on these issues. I don't mind stating them. Do I know 100% that my views are what God wants? Not a chance. Do I even know there is a God? No. If I knew that, I wouldn't have a need for faith. We believe in something we can't see. And I personally don't believe anyone can stand up here and say to you with 100% certainty they know exactly what God thinks on every single issue. We as a church have changed our stance on different issues over time. The very front page of our church manual states that we are open to change, that if a greater light comes in and we see that we've been shown a new way of doing something, then we should take that. When Jesus came to earth, he set himself up to make these changes and to help people accept each other. You even look at the genealogy of Jesus. If you look, it's written in Matthew, first chapter. It's pretty much the first thing you get hit with in the book of Matthew. And here's Matthew writing about Jesus, King of the world, God himself. And Matthew is one of these scammers, these tax collectors of people. And what's different about Matthew is he includes women in the genealogy. And he goes through some of them, and it is brilliant what Jesus says or who he comes from. You know some of these people, you know some of the stories. I won't delve into them too much, but these are some of my favorites. These are direct descendants of Jesus, great-grandmothers, and further up the food chain. We go to Genesis 38, and we talk about an old classic that preachers like to talk about, Tamar, because it's just a brilliant story. Here's a woman who has a husband. Her father-in-law is Judah, and her husband is such a bad man, God kills him. So as is the custom of the time, his brother is then meant to marry her. He doesn't do that. He's happy to sleep with her, doesn't want to marry her. So she goes out and goes, well, how am I supposed to bring forth heirs for this family? I don't know. So she goes out and dresses like a prostitute on the side of the road, waits for her father-in-law Judah to come along. What the heck's Judah doing picking up a prostitute on the side of the road? She conceives twins out of it. Judah finds out she's now pregnant. His daughter-in-law is pregnant and says she should be put to death because she obviously had sex outside of marriage and conceived. And then in a very Jerry Springer twist, she goes, but you're the grandfather daddy person. Of course, he then has to rescind the I'm going to kill you order because that's now the mother of his children as well as his daughter-in-law. This is the family Jesus chose to come through. We go down to Rahab, who you all know. A hooker by trade. A great occupation back in those days, it would seem. And not only that, she's known more for being a prostitute as being a brilliant liar. Here is a woman who lied to save these people. She was a prostitute, and once again, she was in Jesus' direct descendants. We move on to Ruth. Now, Ruth herself was a lovely woman. I think she might have been, was she Jesus' great-grandmother? I think. I could be wrong on that, so don't quote me. Here's Ruth, but Ruth comes from a place in life where she was a Moabite, a completely, entirely different race than the rest of the people. These people, the Moabites, came from incest because it was her family that came from Lot and Lot's daughters. And after Sodom and Gomorrah were wiped out, Lot's daughters go, well, crackers. Where are the kids coming from? So they make daddy a little bit drunk, and they end up having children from him. Ruth is then one of those descendants. And one of my personal favorites, because I love this guy. David's probably one of my favorite stories in the Bible, because I tell you what, no matter where you are in life, David has been there. It doesn't matter if you're this close to God, you hate God, you love God, he has been there. And on that fateful night that you all know, he's sitting out there on his rooftop and he looks across, sees a naked Bathsheba on the other rooftop bathing, and goes, well, she seems smart, let's have her over. So he goes and gets his guys and goes, look, put some clothes on her, optionally, whatever you want to do, bring her over here, and we'll sit down and have a little chat. And of course, that chat turned out to be a little bit more. And all of a sudden, she's pregnant. I tell you what, these women seem to get pregnant pretty easy. Now, what does David do? He tries to cover it up. He goes, well, this is a problem. I'm king, this could be a problem for me. So let's send a husband, Uriah, out to the front line, and we'll hope and pray to God that he'll get killed, and then no one's going to find out what I've actually done, and they'll assume that it's his kid, and we don't have DNA tests now, so I'm okay, I'm pretty safe. God comes down and speaks to him. So here's Bathsheba, another in Jesus' direct ancestral path. Not only commits adultery in her husband, is in with David to try and get him killed to cover up the mistake of them having a child together outside of wedlock while she's still married to another man. These are the people Jesus chose to come from. If you do not think he is an accepting God, I believe you're wrong. He didn't come from the best of the best. He didn't come from the people who had it all together, that had been Adventists for 40 years of their life, or this was 5th generation. He came from people who had screwed up their lives chronically. And when he came down to make change here on earth, he wanted change for people to be accepted. I think we do it pretty well here at Springwood. But human nature takes over sometimes, and I judge. You might too. And the biggest thing I can get out of this is for somebody sitting there in the congregation today, it doesn't matter where you're at, he accepts you. It doesn't matter what you do, where you go, who you sleep with, what you drink, what you eat. He may not want you doing all those things, but he loves you. It doesn't matter if you were an Adventist 40 years ago and have left. It doesn't matter if you've never been one. It doesn't matter if you even believe in God. He still loves you. There's nothing you can do about that. And to prove that, he came from the worst of the worst, showed you everything bad about the world, came here and broke every law he could while living here, to say, you know what? There is a better way. I accept you. Sometimes when he accepted these people in the Bible, he did say to them, look, go, sin no more. I don't think he was expecting them to be perfect for the rest of their lives. But when I sit here or stand here today and I look across and go, you know what? In this place right now, I know there are people who do a lot of things that I don't potentially agree with. There's a lot of people here who don't agree with a lot of things I do. But it's a matter of believing that we belong to the same God who loves me just as much as you. And it doesn't matter where you're at, where you've been, or where you're going, it's not going to change. He will keep fighting for you day in and day out. When my God, our God, can sit down and spend all of his days with what was described as the scum of their society, come from those people, have best friends who are tax collectors and prostitutes. He loves anyone and everyone. That Muslim father in the story at the start, bending down and giving his son an Easter egg, as I said, raised a lot of questions for me. I know a little bit about that religion. They don't believe in Easter. Why is he giving an Easter egg to his son? I did end up speaking to this guy afterwards, just chatting. We're in Johnny Rockets, having a milkshake. And he said to me, the reason he was there with his son was he was still a very strict Muslim himself, believed very much in their belief system. But he said he lived in America. And for him, he didn't put any significance on a piece of chocolate he was giving his son as to meaning he no longer believed in his God. He said, I don't believe this is an issue of faith for me. We chatted and I